But for the introductions, we had the planning team of Michael Baker lead this effort. So my name is Tony Cabrera. I am the Office Executive Vice President for Arizona Operations. Pretty fancy, but I just make sure people are doing their job and pushing schedule. I happen to also be the project manager for this project. So like I said, we are just as excited as you all. Long time coming. And for the rest of the team, we have Russ Moore. Russ is our senior transportation manager. So he was involved with the roadway components of this work. Tom Ritz and John, they're both structural engineers. They're the bridge guys. They're those guys that are smart about putting this thing, designing it to stand up and withhold anything that comes their way. So it's an exciting part to have them really push what that bridge has to be, right? It is a bridge project, so we have the best and the brightest. Over here with Kevin, Kevin's our planning director for all of Arizona. But he led the big push on putting this, not just the presentations together, but the study itself. So really kudos and hats off to Kevin and his team. And Jelena Allen worked with Kevin to make a lot of things happen. So great team that we had working on this project. And of course, we couldn't do it without our team members and other sub-consultants and team members, such as Jill Himes with Himes Consulting, Kevin Murphy with MV5, and of course Kittleson, who does a lot of your traffic modeling and works with the city quite a bit. So moving on from there, the presentation itself will be led by Kevin, and then I'm here to support and lend any answers to the engineering side of things. So, Kevin?
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate everyone being here this evening, and a lot of familiar faces in the crowd that have been with us along for this journey. So appreciate you taking the time to come out this evening, brave the heat and other things going on across the country, and be here tonight. So we appreciate your input this evening. So a couple of you asked me about format of the meeting or handouts or whatnot. In typical, this is a public open house meeting. And in typical open house fashion, the format for tonight's evening is, as Tony suggested in part at least, I'm going to lead a PowerPoint presentation. So those of you who attended the City Council briefing on May 14th, you're going to recognize a lot of the similar content that we presented to Council. However, with the addition of, and on the back end of the presentation, is, as Tony suggested, the recommendation for the preferred roadway and bridge alternative, okay, and kind of some of the rationale and whatnot. And then once I have completed the presentation, we'll open it up for some Q&A, of which we will do our darndest to answer your question as thoroughly as we possibly can. If we can't answer something specifically, I assure you we'll get your name and get back with you on a specific answer. There's a lot of content that goes into something like this, but I'm pretty confident we can field most of the questions this evening. And then once we complete the Q&A, we'll then kind of transition the meeting to kind of the open house format, where on this side of the room we have a station, if you will, that has a oversized presentation board of the roadway alternative, the preferred roadway alternative over here with a series of comment cards. Those of you who joined us at our first public open house meeting on January 29th, I want to say, at the Aquatic Center, same kind of format where we had comment cards, so we encourage you and invite you to fill out those comment cards. Whether you love it, whether you don't, or have some other comment, we want to hear from you. This process is only as good as the input that we get from you all, okay? So we've got plenty of pins and plenty of comment cards, and so once we adjourn the Q&A, you're all asked to stick around and we'll answer some questions. Tony and I will be manning those boards and can answer some more questions for you. So with that, those of you who have seen this, I apologize, but for those who are kind of new to the process, I wanted to underscore the fact that the notion of a second bridge onto the island is not a new concept. In fact, it's the community dialogue on this has been going back quite a long time. The first notch on the timeline says 2001, but I can only squeeze so much on the slide. And actually, the early discussions, as many of you know, go back to the 90s, but really started to get some traction in the early 2000s. where there's the identification of there's an actual report or study that was done in 2004. There was a redevelopment plan of Bridgewater Channel in '06. In 2007, the city was very fortuitous and seized an opportunity to collaborate with the Arizona State Land Department to purchase right-of-way on the island side with and through the State Land Department, who manages a large portion of the lands on the island, as I'm sure many of you know. And then in 2015, the city purchased some parcels on the mainland side, if you will, that's immediately adjacent to the Lake Havasu State Park for the would-be connection, and you'll see here momentarily that the preferred roadway alternative utilizes that very right-of-way that was purchased by the city. And then in 2019, there was an MOU memorandum of understanding, entered into between the city of Lake Havasu and the Arizona State Parks Department for the reservation of potential right-of-way for a would-be, or at that time, a future road, of which we are now here to bring to fruition. And then maybe most importantly, Representative Biasucci led with his colleagues at the state legislature the appropriation of state budget monies for the funding of this project. So you all are very lucky that, unlike a lot of projects, the money is in the bank. So to the tune of $35.5 million, okay? We'll talk about that budget. And then with and through that appropriation, the process has then commenced. This is kind of the first leg of the journey, as Tony suggested. This is called a feasibility study at a planning level to evaluate appropriate roadway alignments and bridge alternatives. And the culmination of that feasibility study is this evening, with sharing those results, ranking those alternatives, and recommendation of the preferred alternative for your feedback. Those of you who have been along for the journey, this will look familiar to you. Those who haven't, just a quick little synopsis. There's been a tremendous amount of public input and dialogue. Began with the first public open house meeting on January 29th over at the Aquatic Center, and had a comment card and a survey that was done online. Tremendous feedback, which we very much appreciate. Like I said, the study in many respects is only as good as the feedback that you give us to help guide us along the way to balance the technical aspects of the study. 337 responses received, which is tremendous, quite frankly, for a community this size. The majority of the comments we received, I would say, are generally positive and supportive of the project. We did have 2 stakeholder meetings then on March 5th, of which we are having a couple more of those tomorrow. So many property owners, 423 property owners who live in the vicinity of this corridor through the study received notification by first-class mail. We held those first meetings on March 5th, and then we're going to hold the second round of those meetings tomorrow in this very room. Last but certainly not least has been our close coordination and collaboration with the Arizona State Parks Department, where through this process, of which they are a very instrumental part of, we've had 4 coordination meetings with Mr. Roddy and his staff in close connection throughout this process. We can talk more about that in a little bit if you like. Real briefly, Tony mentioned Kittleson Associates, along with our traffic engineers. When you start to undertake a project like this, you want to do traffic modeling to understand what the roadway capacity, i.e. the size of the roadway, needs to be to accommodate growth in the area, but also underscore the fact that this project is also rooted in the fact that it's an evacuation route along the way. So that is a key important point to underscore through the process, but in doing so, you want to make sure that the roadways are properly sized. So just real briefly, the analysis compared today's traffic versus tomorrow's traffic, so to speak, simply put, and in 2045. So a typical planning horizon like this is 20 years. And the analysis came back and suggested that a 3-lane roadway facility, which a 3-lane sounds weird to you, it's basically 1 travel lane in each direction with a center turn lane or median, depending on where you're at. A 3-lane roadway is sufficient to accommodate traffic on this new roadway through the year 2045. Interesting to note, though, that you see it on bullet point number 2 there on the results, that McCulloch Boulevard and London Bridge itself was expected to have over 20,000 average vehicles per day, which in 2045, the year 2045, that capacity of the roadway would have been exceeded. So what does that tell you on the flip side of that coin is that kind of provides the rationale and justification for the need of another roadway on the island, on and off the island. I'll skip those last two. This slide will look familiar, and it's not to be redundant, it's just for those who've been along for the ride, just to remind you that what I told you on January 29th, we talked about how we were going to look at this study in basically three components. There was kind of the north component, or a connection potentially to State Route 95, and we evaluated those potential connection points at Palo Verde Boulevard, the Willow Wash alignment, and Paseo del Sol Avenue. The second or middle portion is that roadway approach, or the transition area from London Bridge Road to a brand new road, and the transition that will occur, as you'll see here in just a minute. And then we talked to the bridge crossing and the roadway on the island itself. So just from a geographic segment standpoint, we looked at this study in those three different components. Real briefly, so this is, if anyone was not at the council meeting on May 14th, this is new information to you. This is the proposed roadway cross section, okay? So in just a couple slides, we're gonna look at these roadway alternatives from a bird's eye view, kind of an aerial shot. So I want to orientate you to look at the roadway before we look at the aerial view. This is what the roadway we're proposing to accommodate, so to include, and it's a multimodal facility to have, as I mentioned, the two travel lanes and the two-way left turn lane, or median in the middle. That can also be used for emergency purposes, by the way. Two bike lanes on each side, okay? And then on the west side of the roadway, and so west is left in this graphic, a 14-foot plus or minus multi-use path that can accommodate pedestrians and or bicycles. And then on the east side of the roadway, or on the right side of the graphic, would be a 4-foot separation from the bike lane with landscaping or other materials, and then a 6-foot sidewalk, okay? So we have all modes of travel accommodated in the prism of the roadway. Altogether, that's about 73 feet plus or minus, with some subtle variations to be determined in the final engineering design, which will be the next stage of the process. So, to orientate you for the bridge itself, a cross-section of the bridge. Basically it captures all the same multimodal features, but kind of necks down like many bridges do, right? The bike lanes are not on the bridge itself, on the pavement section. The bikes are then shifted to the multi-use path, but we have two 12-foot travel lanes, the center turn lane and or emergency use purposes, 6-foot sidewalk on the east, and the 14-foot multi-use path on the west. So, with that, I'm going to transition to the roadway alternatives themselves. There's a lot on these graphics here, and what I want to point out to you first is to kind of orient you with the line work that is shown. This is an excellent, this council chambers has so many TVs, it's wonderful in here, but so from wherever your vantage point, this line work, I just want to orientate you because these lines that are up and down the roadway are replicated on each of the alternatives, okay? And so what I just want to point out is that the dashed magenta or purple-ish line is a right-of-way reservation area. I talked about the right-of-way on the island and the MOU with state parks. That's a 200-foot swath of property, okay? And so that's the extent of the right-of-way reservation area. Anytime you see bold yellow lines, those will be retaining walls, along with the thinner blue lines that you see where it's called out as limits of fill. Those are the areas, if you can envision, where the roadway before and after the approach will be at grade, existing grade, then the roadway is going to start to elevate, okay? So that area where you see limits of fill is fill dirt to begin to elevate the elevation of the road to then get to the level of the bridge that needs to clear the channel, okay? So the retaining walls are there to help maintain or hold, for lack of a better term, the dirt in the elevated condition. The bridge section itself is in the orange line work, and then the multi-use path that you saw in that cross section is in the bold green. And then you'll see the traffic signal icons accordingly. So we have a series of 5 roadway alternatives, and within each alternative, there's an A and a B. Okay, The A alternative is always the alternative that has traditional signalized intersections. And then when we get to the B alternative, I'll just go back and forth. The B of the same version, 1B, has a roundabout alternative as opposed to a traditional signalized intersection. Okay? So, real briefly, because I'm going to kind of go through these quickly on the roadway alternatives, and then my colleague who's joining us virtually, John Emmenheiser, is going to go through the bridge slides, and then I'm going to come back and dial in on the preferred alternative, okay? But I want to walk you through these alternatives briefly. 1A, as you can see, you can see some of the pros and cons there, but this ties in right into London Bridge Road. And on this graphic, in case you're having a difficult time orientating yourself, London Bridge Road is right here. Okay, so the roadway will come in and then transition through the city-owned, it's that parking lot, which is city-owned property. The transition onto State Parks property, where the existing MOU contemplates this roadway for many years now, and is shown in that, again, that 200-foot swath. You can see how the roadway is a portion of that 200-foot swath. Comes straight down, crosses the channel in this fashion, and it connects to the existing right-of-way that's already in place, okay, on the island side. So from generating alternatives and looking at different alternatives, I want to really underscore the fact that there's existing right-of-way in place on the island, and there's an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, for the reservation of right-of-way through the state park. So those are variables that exist today that us as the design and planning team are known variables that we are staying within, okay? And that was a primary objective of all the partners as we move forward, so I wanted to underscore that. With this particular alternative, I'm spending a little more time on this one than the others to acquaint you. The others will be a little faster, but this utilizes a connection at Palo Verde Road, which is, of course, to the north, which is, by the way, ADOT's preferred connection point to State Route 95. So, as you can imagine, connecting a new roadway to an ADOT-owned and operated facility is going to require coordination and approval from ADOT. Formal approvals will be done in the upcoming engineering design stage, but of course we've had preliminary discussions to get their feedback. Okay, so ADOT's preferred location is at Palo Verde. So this particular alternative is the least impactful, both physically and on cost, to existing Lake Havasu roadways. It's a very efficient use of the roadway. It's also the preferred connection point to the state park, which I mentioned the 4 coordination meetings with the State Parks Department, of which there is representation here this evening. They had identified that they would prefer to have a connection point, and it will be a full-time permanent, I want to say year-round, Dan, I'm sorry if I misspoke on that, but a full-time access, or at least the potential thereof, at the north end, as this is demonstrated here, the north end of their existing edge of the parking lot, okay? So that's another important project partner variable that's been factored into the design. So this particular alternative achieves that objective as well. A couple cons associated with it is to replace the stop sign at Palo Verde and London Bridge Road with a signal, and then it will require some subtle modification to Palo Verde Boulevard as well. Last but not least, you see in the lower portion of the slide, and we show a lot of costs associated with each alternative. The preliminary cost estimate on this roadway, again, does not include the bridge, is at $11 to $13 million for this particular segment. Okay. So now I'm going to kind of move through these a little bit faster because I did some orientation with the line work and everything else. So 1B, same exact option or alternative as 1A, except with the roundabout options. The only difference you can see is in the cost estimate. Roundabouts cost a little more on the front end to design and construct. However, they're cheaper to own and maintain in the long term. So a little bit more cost on the 1B version of 1. So quickly on alternative number 2, 2A, you can, the roadway has a lot of the same characteristics as 1A and 1B, and you'll see, folks, throughout these options that particularly on the island side, a lot's not going to change, okay? That right-of-way is in place, those known variables are there. The only thing that changes with 2A is how this particular alternative turns at a 90-degree angle as it leaves the state park, It goes due west, if you will, east, on the south side, straddling the south end of Willow Wash with a proposed connection point with State Route 95. So remember we talked about the yellow, meaning the retaining walls? So you can see a lot of yellow there, which translates to more dollar signs for retaining walls to raise the roadway, cross Veterans Way, and connect with State Route 95. Okay, so that's how that option's a little bit different. Certainly, some of the it provides access to the state park, but not at its preferred location. It connects to State Route 95. It minimizes improvement costs or utility conflicts along the south side of Willow Wash. However, it does disrupt business access on Veterans Way. Okay, so that's one of the Achilles heels, if you will, or negatives of this particular alternative.
Hey Kevin, can I ask a question?
Can you, I'm going to go through this and then I'll take questions if you can. Thank you, sir. 2B, again, same exact alternative. We're just replacing the signal at London Bridge, the proposed intersection of London Bridge Road and this new road, and then down on the island at the McCulloch intersection. So 2 roundabouts instead of 2 signals. Pretty much everything else is the same. You can see the cost went up. I was remiss in not pointing out on 2A, 15 to 17 million for this roadway. With the roundabouts, 17 to 19 million. So just a scooch more expensive than alternative number 1. Alternative number 3 is virtually almost identical to 2, except it's identical. The bridge and the island is identical. All through here is identical. The only difference is it goes straight across just out the Willow Wash, but then has another straight into the north end of state parks. So kind of a T intersection, and it has an additional signal, which tends to increase the costs. And we still have those same retaining wall challenges and issues as it straddles a Willow Wash and the proposed connection point at State Route 95. 3B, again, the same as 3A. However, the roundabout option in this particular case, because of road geometrics, is only proposed on the island side. And this is a cost estimate of 17 to 19 million as well. 4A, so again, you can see it replicating a lot of the same roadway characteristics, same exact ones on the island. The bridges, in terms of the alignment, is the same. As we begin to leave the state park right-of-way reservation areas, you can see the roadway traverses at an angle, and it crosses over Willow Wash. If you're jumping ahead and you can see the cost estimate, you'll see that this is an expensive proposition on this alternative, and that is because it's crossing the wash, and there's those yellow lines indicating expensive retaining walls that are more structurally reinforced to accommodate the utilities and the wash itself. You might ask yourself, well, why do we even contemplate that? The reason is that particular location at State Route 95, it meets the minimum ADOT spacing requirements between intersections of Palo Verde and Mesquite, okay? So this is one of the few alternatives that ADOT would even take a look at conceptually, and meets their minimum specifications, okay? And the reason for that, you'll see here, the next slide. So here's 4B, okay? Everything's the same that I just said, except for the roundabout application. On the island side, roundabout doesn't fit in those geometrics at London Bridge Road in this case, so just one roundabout for this option. But you can see the sucker's getting a little expensive, $18 to $20 million, and not a cheap proposition. Alternative number 5. This one we told the public that we'd be looking at, and we did, on January 29th. And this option was, I think, almost like Family Feud, right? If someone had a sound buzzer for the big moment. But this option was eliminated because that's the reason I pointed out that last one with ADOT spacing. So this option is along the Palo Verde, Paseo del Sol alignment. That the Paseo del Sol, any contemplation of connecting to State Route 95 at Paseo del Sol is a non-starter, for lack of a better term. It does not meet those minimum spacing requirements, i.e. this one would be too close to Mesquite, okay? So while it was something that's kind of favorable on the cost side, if it's not going to be approved by ADOT, there's no reason to really even consider it moving forward. But that comes through the discourse of the alternative analysis and those discussions have occurred. So with that, that's the roadway alternatives. I'm going to turn it over to John, who's with us virtually. Hopefully we'll be able to hear him appropriately. John is the bridge engineer that Tony introduced. He's joining us virtually, and he's going to walk us through 7 different bridge type alternatives. John?
Thanks, Kevin. Can you hear me all right?
We can, John. Thank you.
All right, very good. So go through the 7 bridge alternatives. We looked at 7 alternatives. They're all concrete bridges. They're all 3-span bridges and similar span lengths. So the span lengths here are shown as 160 feet, 240 feet, 160 feet for a total of 560. The first 5 alternatives are identical for span length. The differences, and we'll step through the first 5, are primarily the girder type, which will allow a little bit of a more aesthetic or efficient structure, as well as just additional aesthetics to increase the appearance of the structures. We've started out with the most simple and the cheapest structure, and then we'll step through to the slightly more complex. So what we're looking at here is a typical, really similar to a highway crossing, where we have wide flange or I-shaped girders, concrete bridge deck, and then the road configuration up top that Kevin described. It's an efficient structure structurally. We have balanced spans in a 3-span arrangement. So it's not a bad looking structure by any means, but it is the most basic that we looked at of the 7 alternatives. For any future utility accommodation, that would be between the girders, and it would be for any utility to be exposed from below. We wouldn't have an option to hide any of those, but we could put them up in and make them as discreet as possible. And the estimated bridge cost for this would be about $12.5 to $16 million. I'm moving into type 2. Again, looks very similar. Again, we have the I-type or wide flange girders. We have utilities between the girders. What we did here was just added a little bit of additional aesthetics. So rather than just your baseline coating, we could do something with architectural railing, some additional colored coatings on the fascias of the girders, just increase that just a little bit more to have it be just a little bit more aesthetic for the users below and on the bridge. The estimated bridge cost for this only increased slightly. It's about $500,000 with some rounding in there, so between 12.5 or 16.5 million. I'm moving into the third type. So here we introduce a tub girder. And for this span length, the tub girder wouldn't necessarily be structurally required. They do have a little bit more capacity than the I-type girder. The biggest difference would be the aesthetics just of the structure itself. Rather than seeing that I-type from the side and below, we just see 4 girders, and they all have all smooth soffits and fascias, bottoms and the sides, and just has a little bit more of a smooth appearance. And here we also included the aesthetics on the bridge railing and some bridge coatings. The other thing with the first 5 options that I haven't mentioned yet is the ability to have the vertical clearance over the full channel. So we have this label here as a 100-foot width, but as you can see, we extend that the whole way across the water from pier to pier. The estimated bridge cost of this to switch to the tub girders again goes up just slightly, about $13 million to $16.5 million again. Moving into the type 4, really just one component change here. We've added a flared pier. So since we've used somewhat of an arched aesthetic railing on the fascia and the side of the bridge, to start initiating that, provide a little bit more aesthetics from down below, and set that shape up, we've introduced a flared pier with some colored recessed architectural decorations on the pier itself. All the other components are the same. The utilities still, for the most part, go between the girders. We still have that full vertical clearance over the channel. And we have a balanced 3-span, fairly efficient structure. Again, slight cost increase of about $500,000 up to 13.5 to about 17. I'm moving into the 5th alternative, and this is the last of the 3-span beam type bridges. What we did here was, in addition to flaring the piers, we also deepened the girder over the pier. So you can see we come off the pier and start to introduce that arch shape just a little bit in the girder itself. A couple new complications with this. Because of that girder shape, we would have to have some temporary supports in the edge of the channel while we build this. Still be able to keep that open for navigation, but we would have to coordinate that a little bit more, whereas the others could all be constructed without really any impact to the water at all by suspending that center girder section in. And most of the other parameters are very similar to what we've seen before. Estimated bridge cost, again, a more slight increase, about 14 million to 18 million. Now moving into the last two types, this is where we took a look at the arch type structure. So this is a concrete arch that spans the channel, and then some short, called spandrel columns, just to support the girders coming off the arch between the ends of the bridge. The total length of the bridge here is slightly shorter, but for all intents and purposes, it's a similar structure type. To keep the top of the structure shallower, we've used shorter spans with the exception of the long main span over the main channel. A lot of the other components, again, are similar. We would hang the utilities between the girders. We do have some constricted vertical clearance because of the arch. As you can see, we really provide 100 feet, but not a lot more. And it's a complex structure that would require significant false work or temporary supports in the channel during construction. Also notable here is the bridge costs increased significantly. The arch is a more complex structure to design and construct, as well as inspect and maintain, and that estimated bridge cost would be about $20.5 to $26 million. And then for the seventh type, our last type, it's a variation on option 6 that we looked at, just with even a slightly narrower and thinner ribbon type top portion, superstructure of the bridge itself. So we've used these adjacent box girders. That also provides a clean look from below. We can see a smooth, almost ceiling-like surface rather than seeing the bridge girders. And again, it requires the temporary supports from the channel, only provides that 100-foot width, and has a significant cost increase compared to the other options. So that was the brief overview of the 7 bridge options we looked at. I'll give it back to Kevin now to talk about the preferred alternative.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. So, here's where it all kind of culminates, right? The evaluation of the different roadway alternatives, the bridge alternatives, bridge type alternatives. So, the project team applied a 2-tiered process, okay, to select the preferred alternative. The first tier was really a budget affordability screening. So, and we'll show it in the next slide, this matrix, but the one thing that I really wanted to underscore, that the primary objective of this study by the city and our project partners was stay within the budget. Okay, we're fortunate enough to have that budget. We don't want to go looking for other money. We want to build something that is within the budget, stays within the right-of-way, a bridge that is complementary to the London Bridge, but does not overshadow the London Bridge from an aesthetic quality standpoint, but is also functional and, to the extent practical, stay out of the channel to not hamper any recreation or commercial opportunities within the channel. And you heard John speak to that, particularly on the last 2 structures, which were both expensive and complex from a construction standpoint. So, this first tier screening is identified in a matrix like this to really kind of distill down what the realm of possibilities might be with, what can we afford within that $35.5 million budget. And there's a lot of information on this slide, but there's 2 kind of themes that begin to present themselves. You can see the bridge type 6 and bridge type 7 with a lot of the X's, obviously. Those bridges, why they might be the most visually appealing, like I said, they're complicated. They're too expensive to be able to, in and of themselves, to also be able to afford the roadway with the bridge, okay? And then roadway, alternative 5 at the bottom, that you see with the red line through, we identified as the non-starter because it's highly unlikely to be approved by a connection point by ADOT. So this begins to tell a story as the combination of roadway and bridge alternatives that can meet that affordability index, if you will, by virtue, of course, of the green check marks. So with that, we applied a second series of criteria, some of which have some parallels and some overlap, of course, because this is, after all, a construction project ultimately. But we applied for the roadway, cost, constructability, utility conflicts, environmental permitting, durability and maintenance, and traffic operations were the criteria that were applied. Some similar ones on the bridge, of course, cost and constructability, which are almost always at the top. We talked about impacts to Bridgewater Channel, durability and maintenance of the bridge, aesthetic qualities of the bridge type, and utility accommodations and or screening of utilities within the aesthetic of the bridge, okay? So those were the categories that were applied. And so as the project team began to evaluate and put the second tier screening together, this is how the numbers came out, gang. So those on the left side of the table are the different roadway alternatives that we reviewed with you this evening. On the right, on the top side of the graph is all the criteria that we just talked about, and each was ranked by a score of 0 to 4 for each category, for a total potential score of 24, if you will. And just simply put, you can see how roadway alternative 1A and 1B, simply put, ranked the highest. And it scored highest in the individual criteria of cost, durability, and traffic operations in particular. Like I mentioned in the onset of the presentation, this particular alternative has the least impact to existing Lake Havasu roadways, ties in pretty seamlessly, okay? It has the least utility conflicts, etc. So it received the highest score, and alternative 2A and D, the second highest score. So how about the bridges that John just presented? How did they do? You can see in the scoring of the bridges, there's a little bit more compression. And number one, there's more of them. There's 7 of those alternatives. But as John, I think, articulated in his presentation, there's a lot of parallel in terms of the structural design of the bridge. There's a lot of similar concepts that are prevalent throughout each alternative. They have different aesthetic qualities and some different structure features. But what I'm trying to get at is based on the scores. There's more compression in the scores because of the similarity, but bridge alternative number 4 ranked the highest. Particularly ranks higher on the utility screening side and the cost and constructability side. So again, circling back to our mission number 1, if you will, was to keep both the bridge and the roadway within that $35 million budget. So the combination, the preferred alternative that we are suggesting to the community and we'll be presenting to City Council is roadway alternative. It's a combination of 1A and 1B, as I'll show in the next slide, and bridge alternative number 4 that John presented. That we think the combination of those two provides the optimum balancing of roadway performance and operations, that minimizes impact and disruption to the Lake Havasu City roadways, stays within the prescribed areas of the rights-of-way that we talked about. It does provide some optimum access to Lake Havasu State Park, which is of course important. Minimizes utility conflicts. It has no impacts to Bridgewater Channel, and that's an important one from a bridge structure and constructability standpoint. The bridge type, we feel at least, is aesthetically complementary, but not overshadowing to the London Bridge, of course. And maybe last, but certainly not least, it stays within the overall project budget. If I haven't underscored that enough times. So just wanted to reinforce that again.
Good thing.
So you've seen it again. I don't want to be redundant. We're getting a little long in the presentation. So the only thing I wanted to point out is what we're recommending is it's alternative 1A with a combination of 1B. And what I wanted to point out to those who've been along for the process in particular, I made the comment at City Council that we don't normally advocate for either signalization or roundabout. That usually is a community preference type of thing. So I'm eating crow just a little bit because it became very compelling to Tony and Russ, and particularly the engineering design of the team, where a roundabout really works well operationally on the island. And I know we probably have different thoughts and feelings about a roundabout, but what we did is slightly adjusted it to add what's called a slip ramp, and we'll be glad to talk about it when we break from Q&A from the boards, but it allows operations to move more freely, efficiently, they're safer, and the geometrics of the alignment of the right-of-way in combination with the skew of the existing McCulloch Boulevard, a roundabout really works well for those at that particular location. So will it ultimately be, we're hoping it will be, this will be determined in final design, And I know full well that some of you will love a roundabout and some of you are cringing. I've been there and done that. We're just merely suggesting from a professional standpoint, traffic operations based on the geometrics of the existing road in combination with the skew of the right-of-way, a roundabout will function better at this location in our humble opinion, okay? So, reiterating on the bridge, just to remind you, keep it fresh in your brain. As John articulated, this it's an efficient structure with, we think, a nice balanced appearance with the flared piers, as you can see, and no impact to the channel, and it fits within the budget, amongst other things, so I won't belabor the point. Last but not least, just a really high-level summation of the cost, the features. Again, we have large spreadsheets that articulate this in great detail, but to really kind of boil it down for public consumption, the preferred roadway alternative is just a little north of about 14 million. The bridge alternative is just about 16.8. Of course, the process and the next steps that we'll articulate briefly in the next slide. Permitting, final design, or the regulatory process that you have to go through. There's a bridge permit with the feds, right, to get over the channel, et cetera, et cetera. About $3.5 million on that, for a total budget at this preliminary stage of just over $34 million within that $35.5 million. So, wanted to underscore one thing on the cost estimate, just real briefly. If you recall in the previous slides, there was a range, cost range. We applied the conservative or high side of those costs with respect to this overall cost estimate, okay? So it's professional judgment to provide conservative estimates. Next steps, just real briefly. We talked about timeline a little bit. We've had those questions at previous meetings. I gotta tip my hat to the city. They are moving forward right now with the RFQ or request for qualifications to select a civil engineer for the final design. Okay, so as we are buttoning up this planning feasibility study, they are wasting no time, and great for them to move right to the design so they can get moving on the construction of the bridge, okay? So civil design, engineering design for roadway and bridge. Those things don't happen overnight, people, of course, and along the way, the environmental and regulatory permitting that will be required to cross the channel. So the feds will be involved with some environmental and regulatory permitting that will be done commensurate with, in conjunction with the engineering design process. So, and through that process, there will be a contractor to actually construct it. They'll be selected, and the construction process will commence. Okay, so things are moving forward in that with respect to the process. So,
I turned it off.
Okay, it's over, thank you.
Yeah, Cindy, it's done.
Turn it back on. Technically challenged, obviously.
You turned it off again.
There we go. And then, there we go. So introductions. Thank you. It doesn't trust me, right? Not at all.
I'm gonna pause right there. I know there's gonna be a few questions, so let me get my bearings on where we're at in terms of people in the room. I'm gonna start with this gentleman who had his hand up first, and we're gonna take one at a time. I think Anthony got a mic.
I'll bring around a mic.
Yeah. I was remiss in not pointing out early on, I believe the city has been recording this presentation. That can be posted later on the